Hey guys, welcome back to the show today. Today I'm going to do a deep dive into healthy movement, and I have named this one Healthy Movement 101. And I'm going to be talking about what healthy movement is and what stills your movement, what you have control over in your movement health, and what you don't have control over. And I'm doing this at a time that, guys, my book is still at the publisher and they are in the end stages of publishing. I don't know if I get to change anything or not with the book. So I am a little nervous for that aspect because I'm not going to claim, nor have I ever claimed that I am a writer. But it is exciting to know that it's in the end stages of publishing, and the name of it is Healthy Movement. So I do hope that when I get that information out, I have clarified enough for you to understand if you have healthy movement or if you are in movement decline, because those are sort of the two paths that I want to talk about. And in today's show, I want to show you that large gap between healthy movement and movement decline. And I want to show you two paths of movement today. I hope that you find this episode helpful. You'll learn all that you can about healthy movement. And my hope is that you take one step today to get onto the healthy movement path. And if this episode resonates with you, please consider sharing this one. Now, healthy movement is not just how much you move, but most of us think that it is. We think that because we can move, our movement is healthy. This is a large misconception, and it can lead many of us down a path towards surgery or other movement problems in the last half of our lives. When we hit 40, our bodies are not working as efficiently as our younger years. This seems to be the age of the most movement change where it is felt. And for many people, that feeling of falling apart starts after age 40. And it doesn't stop despite our best effort. For many, it ends up in surgery, a fall, or anything related to those things in our 60s and beyond. Most of us feel in control of our movement. We really do. But in reality, there is something stilling it that is outside our voluntary control. And today I'm going to be unpacking a lot of information on healthy movement. And on the movement decline, we typically call aging. Make sure you stop during this episode whenever you can't take it anymore, because it is a lot of information. And then come back to this episode over and over so that you can better understand these concepts. These are all way deeper than the muscle layer, and we've all been taught on the muscle layer. Now back to the book. The book is 19 chapters, and then the last part of the book is 4 sections that talk about how you can start your healthy movement journey. And that really breaks down like what can you do today if you're not moving very well. And I've got some very basic things that you can get out and do at the end of that book that start your journey back to healthy movement. Guys, the reason I am in this space is because once we lose the function of our muscles and we lose the deeper movement system capacity, then we have lost a lot. And when we get into our 40s, 50s, and 60s, when we have the money and we may have more time to be able to do what we need to do to preserve the health of our movement, we've already lost 20 years. So my hope is that you understand that where you are right now, no matter if you're 40, you're 50, you're 60, or you're 70, you can get into a healthy movement path and actually decrease pain symptoms. You can improve your chances of not going into surgery, and you can improve the health of your movement system. But what I do want to get across to you as I'm teaching all of these episodes is when you lose the function of your muscle and it has atrophied and it's smaller and now you have a diagnosis, you already have joint diagnoses as well. I want to be upstream of that. I want to help you to avoid that type of thing, because once you get there, it is a lot of hard work, time, and dedication. And for many people right now that are in that cycle, they are just chasing symptoms, and it's almost like they're sitting on the edge of a cliff and about to fall over. I want to give you the information that you need. I want to support you in a way that you can actually maintain, preserve, and restore your healthy movement. So that's what my area is, to support and help you to stay on the healthy movement path, because that predictable path that we're going to go over, that aging decline, well, that's not a fun place to be once you get to a point where you're starting to experience pain. And so I'm trying to look upstream of that to be able to help you so that you don't land the same way that everybody else has. So I want to break healthy movement down into two parts today: how much you move and how well you move. Now, how much you move is the quantity of your movement. These are your steps, your workouts, your activity that you do every day. Running distance, speed, walking distance, speed, whether you did strength training or cardiovascular work, how many steps you took today. We track this quantity of movement very easily. For the most part, our phones and our devices work to encourage us to move more. Movement is a priority, and there is research to support the gains that we get just from movement. But today I want to talk about movement in a different way, a way that builds awareness of the quality of how well you move. And I want to break down moving well into two categories. And I want to introduce a term that you've probably not heard before. Now, how well you move is the quality of your movement. And this quality of movement comes from various systems more than the muscular system that we are so familiar with. Movement is complex, and we have been taught to look at it only at a muscle layer. Some of us understand a small part of the joint layer because many of us see chiropractors, and chiropractic focuses on the joint level, but that still misses components here. So that's not a bad thing on chiropractic. I'm just saying that there are other things that we have to look at besides just chiropractic. Chiropractic is a huge part of what keeps us healthy. There is a layer deeper than the muscle, and that layer determines the quality of how well we move or whether we move at all. And this system is not under our voluntary control. But fitness and healthcare make us believe that it is under our control. And it does so by telling us to just address the muscle layer. And for outside of the muscle layer, address the joint layer. But there's still a huge gap in that. And I listened to a podcast this weekend. I didn't get through the whole thing, but gosh, who was it? Was it Jimmy McKay? That was talking about this gap, and he didn't want to call it a gap because he was tired of hearing it called a gap. I call it a gap all the time, but he calls it the messy middle. Okay, guys, the good news is that we can gain control of this layer. We can keep it healthy, and we can do that at any stage of life. And I want to get into all of that for you today. Now, as I define healthy movement, I defined it as the integration of 5 different systems working together as one. And when one part of the system is interrupted, a cascade of events happens across all of them at once, setting off a decline in the systems as a whole. And you don't feel this happening because it's outside your voluntary control. This is why we lose mobility, and then we wake up one day and wonder what happened. Okay? How well you move is the one dimension that actually determines your future movement capacity, and it's the one that no one is tracking or clearly understands or teaches on. How well you move breaks into 2 categories: your capacity to move and your function to move well. So let's start with your capacity to move. It is measured deep inside the joint capsule, and this capacity is also what they call in the literature accessory motion. And this is how much space is available for your bone to move inside the joint capsule. Guys, this is the involuntary layer. You do not have direct control of this layer. And later in the show, I'll get into what restricts movement at this layer and what is lost when it becomes restricted. Now, the second thing here is your function to move well. This is how and whether the muscular system supports and sequences your movement, and whether that system is working like it was built to work. Now, understanding how well your body is able to move opens up a question. What do you want to be able to do at 40, 50, 60, and beyond? Most of us want to get down to the floor and get back up, reach overhead, carry a grandchild, play with our grandkids. Basically, we want to move without limitation our entire lives. And all of that depends on how well you move and on whether your movement system is healthy enough to allow you to move well. Now, most of us believe that because we move a lot, we must be moving well. And I refer to this as the activity era. The activity era, there's a lot of misunderstanding in this one area of movement. Moving more is not equal to moving well, and how well you move is the dimension that can decline silently for years, and that puts you on one of two paths. Now, when you think about what activity you do, and you do a lot of it, when your movement system is in decline, your body is not going to be as efficient with your movement. In fact, the body compensates in so many ways to allow movement. It's going to be hard for you to tell if you are doing the best things or if you're just doing what you think works. And one day you're going to discover predictable patterns of pain or other symptoms emerging, even though you have followed all the advice out there. I am coining that there are two different paths related to the health of your movement system. First is the predictable aging decline path, and here is where how well you move silently declines without you noticing, okay? The second is the healthy movement path, where you preserve your healthy movement for life, and this path is going to need a guide or a coach. And I will talk to you more about why you need a guide or coach later in the show. So let's start with the good news. Let's start with what you do have control over. Sitting, standing, and we call these static positions, okay? I want to start with something you're probably doing right now. You're laying down, you're sitting, you're standing, you're driving. No matter what you're doing, this is called a static position, okay? You're holding yourself in one position. Now, you've probably heard that sitting is a problem and that sitting is the new smoking. Many of you spend thousands of dollars for better sitting ergonomics, thinking you are doing that all that you can do to support your body's movement while you sit. And sitting is actually blamed on a lot, and that framing misses the actual mechanism that is happening. Guys, it is not sitting that harms you. It is the stillness, that static, sustained, unchanging load on a joint held in one position. To understand why, you have to know what the tissues around your joints are actually made of. So let's dive a little bit into that. The ligaments and the joint capsule are what we call viscoelastic tissues. They are part elastic, kind of like a spring, okay? Or elastic be, I guess, more like, just something that you can pull, like taffy, right? They resist load and return towards their original shape. But they are also part fluid, like something thick and slow moving, and they gradually deform under steady pressure and do not immediately bounce back. So when you hold a sustained load or a posture, the tissue slowly gives. The fluid inside is going to shift outside the area that is loaded, and the fibers that give the tissue its strength are going to slowly stretch and sort of start to reorganize. The tissue deforms under constant load. And the researchers that work in this area of research, they call this CREEP, that's C-R-E-E-P. McGill and Brown documented this in the spine. And when you hold a sustained loaded posture, a slumped flex position is the classic posture. If you hold that for roughly 20 minutes, you get measurable creep on those tissues. And this just means the tissues stretch out, they lose tension, and they lose some of their ability to stabilize the joint. Now, those tissues also do something else. They are wired, embedded in the capsule on the inside and in the ligaments too, there are sensors called mechanoreceptors, and these report joint position and load back to the nervous system. And they report joint position and load back to the nervous system and help drive the reflex that keeps your stabilizing muscles firing. So this work showed that when creep sets in and the tissue goes it loosens, then those sensors are sort of dulled, okay? They stop reporting accurately. And when that signal drops, the reflex that drives your deep stabilizing muscles also drop with it. So in the spine, that is a deep muscle called the multifidus. And that muscle has a job to hold one vertebrae steady on the neck. So when we're talking about a sustained still posture, it does two things. It's going to leave the tissue slack, and it's also going to reduce the drive to the muscles that stabilize the joint. Okay, so basically recovering from that posture, when you go from a sitting position to a walking one, you're going to lose roughly about half of the stiffness that you need within about 2 minutes of moving. Okay, full recovery of the tissue takes considerably longer than the time you spent actually in a sitting, standing, or driving position. So basically, you're going to be losing it faster than you're going to get it back through movement. Okay. The 20-minute figure is spine data, and some of the foundational work on viscoelastic creep was done on animal models. So the precise number belongs to the spine and those studies. It doesn't mean that every joint in your body fails at exactly 20 minutes. I don't want 20 minutes to freak you out. But what is well established and generalizes is the principle: the sustained static load causes these tissues to creep. Creep reduces both their support and their signaling to the nervous system, and movement is going to restore it to a point, but not completely. So the practical application is simple. Don't hold any single loaded position. Sit, standing, driving, or otherwise. You don't want to do it for long, unbroken stretches. Interrupt it. Stand, shift your weight, walk for a minute or two, move a little bit while you're sitting. About every 20 to 30 minutes is what we look for. Do this to interrupt the creep before it builds and to keep the reflex to your stabilizers active. And a static good posture still loads the same tissues in the same way. So the useful goal is not perfect posture here. The best goal is to understand good posture and use that as your baseline. Most people that I have spoken to or see in the studio don't understand what neutral posture is, and that deserves a show on its own. Now, the second thing that you have control over is strength. And this is one of the highest leverage items on the list. Now, here is the research that reframes how I think about it. The Pure study, published in the Lancet in 2015, followed around 140,000 people across 17 countries. The measure was that they used was grip strength, which is how hard you can squeeze. Every 5 kilogram drop in grip strength was associated with about 16% higher risk of death from any cause. Now, grip strength predicted mortality better than systolic blood pressure did. Now, I want you to understand this correctly because the mechanism is the point here. Grip strength is not itself the thing that extends life. Squeezing harder does not extend life or do much of anything. Grip strength is a window, okay? It's one of the cleanest, cheapest readouts we have of something larger. Your total body strength, your muscle mass, the function of your muscles, how well your nervous system can recruit those muscles. When your grip is strong, it usually reflects that the whole system behind it is intact. Now, when grip is not strong, it usually reflects that something upstream is in decline. So grip strength is a marker. It is a test that is used in longevity and fitness, and it is a good indicator of health and lifespan. The reason strength matters for how you move is more direct. Muscle is not only what moves you. It is what protects the joint that allows the movement. The deep stabilizers, which are the same muscles the sitting research just showed can be quieted by creep, what keep a joint centered and tracking correctly through its motion. So load lands where the joint is built to take it. So strong, well-recruited muscle is active support for the joint. And a muscle declines and mass declines, so does the actual function of the muscle decline. Grip strength tests are looking at function. I look at this test as a way to help describe the loss of function in the muscle that we lose. Now, hopefully that helps you connect what the function of the muscle is and how function is not equal to strength. They are both very different. And here's another way to look at things with testing. This is where it gets complicated. I feel like the muscle layer is the most complicated because we, in large, really promote exercises for our larger muscles, and we disregard that deeper muscle that is protecting our joints. Now, if we looked at that same study, that pure study, it did not find a clear link between grip strength and a protection from falls or fractures. So the data does not support the claim that getting stronger will prevent you from falling. And I'm not going to make that correlation or association. What the research does show consistently is that people who keep their strength tend to age better across the board. Strength and health sort of are, they travel together. Now, the practical application here is, of everything on this list, if you commit to one demanding thing and you build your strength and you keep it, not for just a short amount of time, but you have to do this consistently and ongoing throughout your lifespan. Strong muscle supports your joints and protects your function against a decline that otherwise comes with age. This is squarely in your control, but having strength alone will not keep you off of a surgeon's table. I want you to understand that. So just because you're strong, it won't keep you off a surgeon's table, and it's not going to help with fall risk, okay? So even though strength is great for bone health and muscle mass, I want you to understand how this relates to healthy movement, because this is why I say healthy movement or movement in general is very complex. We tend to think of movement correction as very easy. Give me a stretch, give me strength exercises. That's all I need. Guys, it doesn't work that way. And for most people, it doesn't work that way. So before I keep rambling, let me give you more things that you can control here. Strength is huge. I do want to leave you with that. Strength is huge. But guys, I'm not completely bought into heavy strength because if the system underneath is not working, then strength also, when you're putting heavy load on it and it's uneven, can lead you down a path to uneven loading, which we know the path that leads to osteoarthritis on that side of things. Now let's talk about stretching and mobility work. Stretching and mobility are the things most of us reach for when we feel tight, stiff, or sore. And here is the common belief. My muscle feels tight, so it must be short. So stretching lengthens it back to normal. And that's a reasonable thought process, but it is not what the research shows is happening here. So when you stretch over weeks to gain range, the tissue is not mostly becoming permanently longer. What is mostly changing is your tolerance to the stretch, your nervous system learning how to allow more range before it signals discomfort. Now, Wepler and I think it's Magnuson examined this, and the better explanation for most of the flexibility people gain is sensory rather than structural. Okay, it's what you feel and not length itself in the muscle. You are not remodeling the muscle into a longer piece of tissue. You are increasing how much stretch your nervous system will permit. I also want to bring into this that you're not stretching the area that controls the decline, and that decline is in the muscle and the joint. Your body compensates so well. So when you are stretching, you are feeling like you're getting a longer muscle, lengthening muscle, because you can go deeper into a stretch. But guys, you're just getting movement from somewhere else in your body that your body's allowing you to pull that movement from. And that is a problem altogether, and another show. There is also a limit worth stating. Stretching does not protect you against injury the way that strength does. Larson's work compared these strategies across the research, and strength training meaningfully reduces injury risk, while stretching on its own essentially it doesn't help prevent injury at all, guys. So if you choose your time wisely, strength training will provide more gains than stretching will, but most people are very uncomfortable with strength training, so they turn to stretching as the solution. Both stretching and mobility drills act on the parts of the movement system you can consciously reach, the muscle, and the range that you can feel and control. Mobility drills train your control and comfort through a range you can voluntarily access. That's the layer that they work on. I'm not saying to stop stretching or doing mobility drills, but if you are low on time, focus on what gives you more results. The point I want to make here is that stretching and mobility drills feel really good. They work for different reasons, but know that they don't do what you may think the outcome is that you want to achieve. I always say, look at what I put into my body kind of like it's a bank. What I put into my body, I want to be able to see gains later in life that improve my movement. Stretching and mobility drills are great, but they are not giving you the return of function in your muscle. And guys, the function is what is lost here. So there are 3 more things that you can control, and there are many more, guys, but I'm just going to go over a few here because I want to make a point that there are things that you can control and there are things that you can't control. The other 3 things here that I want to talk about are sleep, stress, and nutrition. And I'm going to treat them all differently. Sleep, stress, and what you eat. They are huge. And I'm going to stay general here. And I want to say why, because I'm a movement coach. I'm not a physician. I'm not a dietitian. I'm not a sleep specialist. Those are not my areas. I just want to show you how each one of these touches the movement system. And I want to point you to the right specialist for the detailed protocols. But as general knowledge, sleep is when the body does its repair work. And the muscle and your connective tissue around your joints, they rebuild during strength. And the nervous system uses that time to kind of settle out of its alert working state. Now, for most of the Americans out there, the nervous system is working so hard to handle movement that it doesn't get to relax at night. It's just constantly staying on during your hours of sleep. So nobody really, because that system is not taken out of protective mode. That's another whole show that we could talk about. But chronic short sleep means less of the repair that you need. And it means a nervous system that stays sort of revved up or braced. So sleep is not separate from movement. It sets the amount of recovery the whole system runs on. So what I want you to understand with sleep is that sleep is important and is related to movement health. You can control how much and how well you sleep, prioritizing sleep because you have control over that area. Now, stress connects directly to the mechanism at the center of this episode. Under chronic stress, the nervous system stays elevated, holding you in a low-grade version of alert, which is a protective state. Muscles slightly brace and guard during this time, and that guarding is the same response the movement system produces when a joint loses its support. So the deep stabilizers sort of turn down, the larger muscles protect and brace the joint. Chronic stress keeps the system leaning towards that guarded state all the time. So it is not only a feeling that you carry, it can keep the body closer to the pattern that drives movement decline. Managing stress is something that you do have control over. Nutrition, and here I want to stay firmly in my lane. The muscle and the tissues around your joints are built and repaired out of what you eat. And protein in particular provides the raw material for rebuilding muscle. Now, that is as far as I'm going to take it because the specifics of how much, what kind, timing, they belong in a different area. I am a movement coach. The point for you to hold is that the system I am describing is built out of what you feed it. And you have control over what you eat. This is a large area you can work to improve in order to build muscle. And guys, those of you that are in a decline, and we've been in decline for 20, 30 years, and you're losing the function of the muscle, it's going to take more effort and more protein to actually rebuild that muscle. And it also takes a lot more time. Now, this is just a few of the things that you have control over when it comes to movement. And there are many more that are out there that I have not listed here. But I want your takeaway to be movement through the day, strength, stretching and mobility work, sleep, stress, and nutrition. Each of these supports the movement system in its own way. Pain, stiffness, tightness, soreness in the muscles and joints can be supported through these things. This is what you have solid control over. There is, however, a second category. Every one of these inputs acts on the parts of the movement system you can consciously reach. Muscles, the range of motion you can feel. But guys, the movement system also has a layer that is not under your voluntary control. And none of these inputs that I mentioned above acts on it directly. Most of us get lost in the muscle area, the areas of sleep, nutrition, stress, moving, strengthening. That's a lot of stuff. But guys, this show today is about that deeper layer that we can't control, the layer underneath your muscles. Now, this is the area that I specialize in because it is where the quality of your movement is actually decided. So this is the part this is where I get all nerded out with. So deep inside every joint, past the muscle, you can feel and control. The bones themselves they have to move against each other in a specific way. And you have multiple types of joints in your body that allow movement. And today I want to talk about sort of ball and socket joints in general and other joints in general, okay? For a joint to move well, the bone has different jobs based on the type of joint. What I measure is the available space that joint needs to allow movement of the bone, the movement that our bodies were built to move. That small internal motion of the bone within the joint is called accessory motion. Now, this is the foundation underneath the larger movement you already understand, and that's the muscle. Accessory motion is well established in the movement science literature. It is not under your voluntary control. You cannot consciously produce it. You cannot isolate it. You can't train it the way that you can train a muscle. It occurs only in response to force applied to the joint, and it is not something that you can will into happening. This is the difference between the layer you can reach and the layer that you can't reach. Every input above is the first part, and the first part of this episode acts on the muscle and the range of motion that you can measure as normal or better. None of these guys reach directly into this accessory motion because this motion is not something you consciously operate. Yet this is the layer, guys, that fails first. And the biomechanics literature shows that a joint can begin to lose its accessory motion, this sort of glide and roll of the bone, before there is any measurable loss in range of motion that you can see, and long before there is any pain. Guys, the restriction begins silently when the joint capsule stops allowing this accessory motion. So to answer what steals your healthy movement, we're going to start here at the joint restriction, okay? The joint restricts for a reason you are completely unaware of. Your body will not tell you when it's going to restrict this motion. Let's talk about what happens when that deep motion is lost. When the joint is considered restricted, this is where the mechanism becomes a cycle, and this cycle is what we can better understand, and all of us need to understand this, okay? When a joint loses some of its accessory motion, it can be from an injury, it can be from inflammation, from wear and tear, or sometimes from no clear cause at all. The nervous system responds in a protective way. It reduces the signal to the muscles that support and stabilize that joint. And guys, it could be doing this to many joints in the body. It could be turning them down, all of them. This is not a muscle being weak or damaged. This is the nervous system inhibiting a muscle around a joint it's sensing as compromised. Now, in the research, The name that this is called is arthrogenic muscle inhibition, and it's been documented for decades, most heavily at the knee, with a growing body of evidence at the hip and other joints. That is the established science, and it is the mechanism at the center of what I do. I call this the silent shutdown cycle because of how it behaves. The muscle is shut down silently by the nervous system, and the process makes no sound and it sends no signal that you're going to feel. Here's how it produces the tightness that you actually notice. The muscular system has two layers. You have deep stabilizing muscles that are very close to your joint capsule, whose job is to hold this capsule centered. And then there are larger muscles which move your joints that produce the range of motion that you're familiar with. And when arthrogenic muscle inhibition sets in, your deep stabilizing muscles are the ones that are turned down first. So basically the joint loses its steady base and position. The larger muscles then brace to compensate. So two different things are happening here in the muscle system. And the larger muscle is going to take on a guarding, protective, holding pattern to make up for the stability lost underneath at the deep muscle. That bracing, that guarding of the larger muscles, that is the tightness that you feel. That's the first symptom that some people feel. Now, there are other symptoms, and I'm trying to gather all of these symptoms up for you so that you can better understand what these are. But we're going to kind of narrow this down and come to a point here at the end of the show. But this is why stretching, that tightness, doesn't resolve it long term. When you stretch a muscle that is braced and guarding, you are pulling on a muscle that's in a holding state. The nervous system has it holding to protect the joint underneath. That stretch may calm it for you, but that tightness is going to return because the reason it was guarding was never addressed. Now, the tightness is a symptom of the joint underneath losing support. That's why the relief from stretching doesn't last. Your body, guys, is looking for support, not a stretch. You stretch because you think that your muscle is tight, and that's a common misconception. Arthrogenic muscle inhibition is very well documented, but it's almost always studied after a surgery, after injury, after a joint already hurts or has a disease. And that is established research. What I see in my studio and what I propose is that this same cycle can begin much earlier and much more silently. And it's set off by early loss of that accessory motion long before you have any pain. You're not going to feel anything. And that earlier silent beginning is my observation and my proposal. And I want you to hear the line clearly between what the research has established and what I'm proposing from what I see in my studio. So stay with me here, because this begins silently and it stays silent. Most people do not encounter it until the very end of the process, when it finally produces pain. Pain is not the start of this. Pain is the late signal. The point where the body can no longer compensate for the joint restriction and the muscles are no longer functioning to support movement at your joints. And you can see where the path tends to lead across the decades and the pattern of what people are treated for as they age. In your 40s, many people already feel tightness, stiffness, and soreness, but most are now trying to Google, what stretches do I do? Many of you are finally going to go to a stretch facility and get stretched deeper than you can stretch themselves, what you can stretch yourself. But the cycle has been silently running for about 20 years at this point. Most of us think everything starts at 40. I see this differently. Now, in the 50s and early 60s, it often shows up in the shoulder. Rotator cuff repair is one of the fastest growing surgeries in that age group. Now, into the 60s and 70s, the knee and the hip becomes the surgeries. This is as osteoarthritis leads to joint replacement, and those surgeries cluster in those decades. Now, through the 70s and beyond, the risk becomes the fall. About 1 in 4 adults over 65 falls each year. And for someone whose bones have already thinned, a fall can mean a fracture, and a fracture at that stage can be life-threatening. And guys, underneath much of this, muscle mass has been quietly declining 3 to 8% a year, and the research shows that loss accelerates after 60. This is the time of life where we feel like we're starting to get unhealthy and we're falling apart. Even many of the diagnoses we treat as separate problems trace back toward the same place. Tendinitis, bursitis, and the bone spurs that show up on imaging are described in the research as the body's response to abnormal loading and joint instability over time. The body adapting to a joint that has not been moving or loading the way that it was built to. And if we look at this differently, we can see that our bodies turn off the support we need through a protective response, but it doesn't have the ability to turn that protective response off. So the symptoms, in my opinion, are our bodies asking for support of the joints. Now, I am introducing the silent shutdown cycle to help you see that there is a cycle that stills our movement, and it begins at a joint restriction, then causes a decline in the joint and the muscle and in more systems than those. I focus on the joint and muscle in my studio. I also focus on the 5 drivers of healthy movement. And I do want to state first, not all of this comes from the silent shutdown cycle alone. You also have aging, bone health, genetics, and life. All of them play their part, and I'm not going to sit here and claim one mechanism explains it all. I do not treat, cure, or prevent any of these conditions. That's the medical lane. That's not my lane. What I do look at is movement underneath, the loss of accessory motion and the inhibition that follows, which is upstream of all these outcomes and which can be identified and traced. Now, there is one more number worth putting on the table because it describes the scale of what we are talking about. Researchers at the Mayo Clinic, writing in JAMA Network Open in 2024, found that Americans now live an average of about 12.4 years at the end of life, burdened by disease and sickness. Now, the widest such gap in the world, and for women, it runs about 2.4 years wider than it does for men. So when asked what drives that gap, the study's senior author pointed first to musculoskeletal conditions, the conditions most associated with lost movement. Now, guys, this is an association. It's not a proven cause, but it does point to the same layer this whole episode is bringing to you today. So I want to pull these 2 halves of this episode together so that you can see everything you need to preserve the health of your movement system. In the first part, I gave you what you can control. Interrupting long, still positions, move, do it often. Static positions are harder on your body. Other things you can control, building and keeping your strength, stretching and mobility work, but understand what you're getting when you do these. Sleep, stress, nutrition, all of these things have direct control. You have direct control over. This is what I call inputs that support your movement system. All of them are proven to help you build strength, stability, and improve overall health. Now, the second part that I am introducing today, and I describe what stills your healthy movement, is a joint silently loses some of its accessory motion, deep, involuntary glide of the bone that you cannot feel or train. And the nervous system responds by turning down the muscles that stabilize that joint. The larger muscles brace to compensate, which is the tightness you feel, and the whole process runs silently, often for years until it finally surfaces as pain. So here is where the 2 halves meet. Everything in the first part of this show acts on the layer you can reach, which are the muscles and the range of motion you can consciously feel and control. The decline in the second part begins in the layer you have no control over, the accessory motion, which is not under voluntary control by definition. So there is a gap between them, and the things you can do act on one layer. The decline begins in another, and those 2 do not fully overlap. Now, this isn't a gap in effort. A person can do everything in the first part of this episode faithfully and consistently for years, and the deeper layer can still be losing motion because the tools you are using were never able to reach that involuntary layer. This is the gap that I specialize in. The layer where this decline begins is not one you can stretch, strengthen, or will back into working again. Now, I'm going to stop here on the information itself because that's the honest place to stop. The research supports that this deep layer exists. It supports that it's involuntary and it can begin to fail before pain, and that the things most people rely on act on a different layer. What I want you to leave with is not an answer today, but a clearer question than the one most people are asking. The common question is, am I doing enough? The more accurate question, given everything we have covered today, is anyone actually looking at the layer you cannot control? That is healthy movement. And understanding that how well you move is decided in a place underneath the muscular layer. Guys, thank you for spending this time with me. If it gave you a clearer way to think about your own body, please share it with someone you care about. Healthy movement is very complex, and this is why you need someone to guide you to preserve your healthy movement. It is too easy to think that you are in control than to find out you were working on the muscle layer while the joint and muscle were being controlled by a deeper force. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed this information.